Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to allow just another minute or so for the audience to come in, and we will be starting the presentation at the top of the hour. All right. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Market Research in the Procurement Process. We're glad you're here. Thanks for coming and spending some time with us. At the close of today's presentation, you'll be asked to complete a very brief questionnaire. Your feedback is very valuable to us here at NASPO. Today's presentation is good for one UPPCC contact hour. To get your certificate, simply complete the questionnaire following the presentation. This is a webinar for NASPO members, and we want you to capitalize on your NASPO membership this year by using this excellent tool that we'll talk about today, Procurement IQ, and by checking out the other great resources that NASPO provides at naspo.org. Catch up with our blog, NASPO Pulse, for all the latest articles and podcast episodes, and watch your inbox for more information on other products coming soon. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to explain the format of today's webinar. All attendees are muted. You can enter comments and questions in the chat box. If you'd like to ask our presenters a question, you can type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your window. Our presenters today are Austin Bachman, CPPO CPPB, Assistant Director of the Louisiana Office of State Purchasing. Also with us, Procurement IQ Senior Relationship Manager, Kalia Canley, and Procurement IQ Senior Relationship Manager, Diane Yu. NASPO is grateful to have you all here with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Austin, to get us started.
Thank you. All right. So to get started with this, we'll start with how Louisiana performs our market research and the integral part Procurement IQ plays in that. And when I was reflecting back on our usage of Procurement IQ, I can actually still remember the first time that I logged into IBIS World, which is now Procurement IQ. So NASPO had just subscribed, and my CPO at the time had forwarded the information to me, asking me to check this out. Is this something that we can use in our office? I was kind of skeptical. It's this new thing. Logged in, thought about what maybe I might want to look for. So I just typed in security guard services. I'd just been asked to look in the feasibility of doing a statewide security guard contract. So, why not start there? I just started doing market research on this. And this report pulls up, and in, the amount of time it took me to type in security guards, I had all of the information at my fingertips that had taken me 3 weeks to compile. I read maybe half of the first page and immediately was calling my CPO and letting them know, this is a complete game changer. They've pretty much done all the market research for us already. So since that first introduction, to Procurement IQ. We've embedded its use into our organizational strategy. And we're doing that two main ways. First one is for contract renewals. And the second is for new solicitations or new bids that we're going out with our RFPs. What we're finding is it's a tremendous way to optimize our resources. In Louisiana, we'll get to this in just a second, but we have a fairly large staff, but we also have a large workload that comes along with that. Most of what we're finding in Procurement IQ are probably things that we would be able to find ourselves, given the time. But Procurement IQ is really allowing us to use our time and our resources in a better way that can bring more value to Louisiana. Yeah. So start with just a little bit about Louisiana, provide some context about what we'll be discussing. We're a centralized procurement agency. So we handle all procurements of services, supplies, major repairs on behalf of all state agencies in Louisiana. So we have 8 teams. We're at about 99 staff members. And here are some of our teams that we'll go through and discuss kind of where we use these. But our one-time buy team handles one-off purchases using low bids, invitation to bid process. Our blanket order teams handle contracts that are a known quantity over a set period of time. So things like security guards, HVAC maintenance, things like that. Our commodities teams are our statewide contracts. These are unknown quantity for a set period of time. And we have 2 RFP teams that handle all of the RFPs in the state, the professional contracts team that reviews and approves professional contracts, and then our analytics team that does reporting, data analysis, and handles most of the business side of our office. So when it comes to contract renewals, the Procurement IQ report is required in all of our contract renewals. This is alongside more traditional metrics such as the PPI or CPI that we use when we're determining whether to renew or rebid a contract. And we're doing this to get a more complete picture of that commodity or service. Finding the PPI information really shows past information, and especially lately, the provisional numbers seem to be off a bit, and that's usually the last 4 months. So when we're trying to make a decision to base solely on PPI, we can't really rely on the numbers too much. But with Procurement IQ, we're mainly looking forward. So they have a lot of forecasting there. Their buyer power score in particular is showing you what the price environment's looking like. And they also have recent developments that will go through what are the trends in that industry. All right. So for an example of this, we'll look at janitorial chemicals. And we have a contract that had 1 year remaining. It's up for renewal, and suppliers asking us for a price increase due to increased input costs. So in kind of a traditional way of thinking about it, we would use PPI as their data point to look at what we should do here. And traditionally, that's if the PPI shows that it's decreasing in price, you're going to think about rebidding to lock in a lower rate. If they're increasing, traditionally, you're going to want to renew. So janitorial chemicals are showing a 7.6% annual increase. So using a more traditional method, what this would mean is we would look to accept a price increase from the supplier of up to 7.6%. That would be kind of our stopping point on what we would accept. Anything over that, and we would look to rebid. But when we incorporate Procurement IQ into this process, we're getting a lot more additional information. So we can log into Procurement IQ, can actually search for janitorial chemicals, and a report on detergent shows up. There's not really a search window where I go pick on that. It just pops immediately up. And there's a report description that shows, this is what I'm looking for, even though it's not the same name as maybe what we would call this product. All right. So using the Procurement IQ report, on the very first page, I can see that the prices are expected to continue to increase. And I also see that the buyer power score now is 0.7. This is on a 5 to -5 scale, with 0 being neutral. Positive numbers indicate that you should buy the product or service now. As a shift to negative, it indicates the suppliers have more power, which means it's going to be more, you're going to pay more. It's going to be a more difficult negotiation. So I see now it's 0.7. I also see the forecast is for that to change to -2.1 for 2023, which just so happens to be is the last renewal we have remaining. So we'd be bidding it out in 2023 if we decide to renew. All right. We can also see the trends on the first page. They're somewhat neutral, but it shows us what's going into price fluctuations here. Price of oil, the trend saying that that's expected to decrease. I think we're probably at a high point, so that made sense to me. A neutral was that cleaning requirements for COVID are kind of going away or starting to go away. So that means there should be more supply in the market. And then a warning sign is that there's apparently a soybean shortage, which was news to me that soybeans somehow go into or an input into janitorial chemicals. So with access to this additional information, it's no longer kind of that no-brainer decision of, as long as the supplier is telling us that they will only raise prices by 7.5%, we'll accept the renewal. Renewing at 7.5% may end up costing us more money in the long run because those prices we're going to inflate prices for this current year, and then we're going to bid it out at an even higher price for next year if this forecasting trend holds. So the way we operationalize that is we go in, and in this case, maybe we look and say, we'll accept a maximum price increase of 5%. So it helps with our negotiation with that supplier. Let them know, what we'll accept. If they go any higher than this, we're going to rebid the contract. Yes, it might lock in higher rates now, but they're expected to increase even more. So you can see at times you'll find even that the PPI is showing you that you should rebid, but the Procurement IQ report with a lot more information is showing you that you should be renewing, or vice versa. I mentioned the other method we use, our main use of Procurement IQ in Louisiana, is probably my favorite use, is for new solicitations. And I said new solicitations here, but you also use it when you're doing your rebid or your traditional market research. And it's essentially bringing the strategic sourcing process to your fingertips. Makes it a whole lot easier, gives you a big head start in that process. So it's the first thing we would do when it comes to market research for preparing a bid or an RFP, is logging in and searching to see if there's a report on the product or service that we're trying to source. And when we're using Procurement IQ this way, we're actually using a lot more of the full breadth of the report than in the renewal realm. So here we get access to who are the top vendors in the industry. It also will indicate to you their market share. So you know if it's relatively spread out or if it's very consolidated market. We can see the key drivers that are the inputs or external factors that impact the market or the industry. We can look at the pricing model. This is one of the biggest ones we use to see how that industry is pricing their goods. Traditionally, you'd have to schedule a lot of your vendor meetings and ask them how do you price these when you're selling this good. Procurement IQ shows us all of that, as well as what items we could expect on an invoice. What extra charges are they gonna try to sneak in there? We can also see vendor qualifications. These are really where you can start building out your specifications or your scope of work. We can also use it to come up with what we need to use as our evaluation factors in an RFP. And the same thing with the negotiation questions, that it actually helps you determine what you're needing from your suppliers in your proposal, or in the proposal that they're submitting. So it's a very good starting point when you have Procurement IQ. It fills in a lot of gaps very easily, very quickly. We can take that information, use it to schedule our vendor meetings. We know who our top vendors are that we might need to bring in. We'll have, a crash course on what that industry is, what's important there, so that we're not kind of going in blind. We know the right questions to ask in those meetings. And it really gives us a head start in brainstorming kind of what needs to go into our solicitation documents as well. So an example for this would be looking at armored car services. That was something a while back we were looking into. Had several state agencies that might need the service, and it wasn't something we'd ever done. So in Procurement IQ, searching for armored car services immediately pulls up armored transport services. Quick check verifies that that is what we're looking for. On the first page, we've got the top vendors, showing 5 vendors are listed. I can drill in more in depth to that by going to the supply chain and vendors page, which shows me that 3 of those vendors comprise 75% plus of the market. And that their market share is increasing. So I know this is a very kind of closed off market, almost an oligopoly at that point. So this is telling me there may be competition amongst those 3 as well, but also I can see, are those 3 companies all operating in Louisiana? And then the additional top vendors, are those also operating? So, I mean, that's something which vendors do armored car service. I could just do a Google search, but then I'm going to have to drill in more. I'm not going to know how much market share they have or anything like that. And it's also going to take time, and I'm going to have to wade through all the ads and everything. So, this is 2 clicks away. Log in and then type in armored car, and I have that information in Procurement IQ. With the key drivers for this report, they're right there on the top half of the front page. So I can see price of oil is a big input, wages for security guards, and then some maybe things that you wouldn't think about, like the number of businesses in your area that are using the service, also impact the industry. You can also see the breakdown of the cost structure there, which shows me that the profit margin on average is 4%. And that wages make up 43% of the cost for armored car services. It's all good information that we can use as we're developing our procurement strategy. Okay, as I move over to the price environment page, we get more detailed information on the price, but I really like to focus there on the pricing model. Here it's showing me that just about everybody in the industry uses a fixed price per pickup, but also that one of those maybe not so hidden fees that may come through would be delays caused by the client agencies. So we know when we were to bid this out, we would need to account for that with a line item for demurrage. Personally, where I feel I get the most value out of Procurement IQ, though, is the business requirements page. And this really, it's almost like they've written half of an RFP for me on this page. So I can look at the vendor qualification section immediately. I know that my evaluation factors, or what is important here, is going to be the capacity. So do they have, room in their trucks and in their routes to fit in our state agencies? How are they how are they training their employees? And then the condition of their fleet. A little further down on this page, you can see why they think those factors are important. They have a reasoning section, and then they even show you the measurements you can use to determine if the person's doing a good job. Reading through the reasoning for the fleet condition, it even wrote a specification for us if we were to include that in the scope of work, saying that trucks should have exteriors constructed of thick steel plates that have been hardened with heat or chromium and nickel, while trucks' windshields should consist of several layers of automotive glass mixed with layers of bullet-resistant optical plastic, and plastic liners should reinforce the tires to provide enough stability for the vehicle to flee the scene. So that's just one example I pulled out of that report, just to show kind of the depth of information you can pull directly out. So then as we move to the negotiation questions here, these are things you could almost just create a questionnaire in your RFP to have the proposers answer them. So I can see such things to ask as, what worst case scenario situations are the security guards trained to handle? How soon will I be made aware if any obstacles prevent my cargo from being delivered on time? What do you see as being the most significant benefits from developing long-term relationships with clients? So that was just a sampling. I think they had probably 20 or 30 questions that are in there. We find we don't necessarily use everything, and maybe everything's not applicable in a government context, but most of it is. And then it also will get you thinking. You can use some of the information out of the report to flesh out additional questions and other items that you need to include in your scope. So this is an overview really of how we're using Procurement IQ. And I guess we'll have questions, and then we'll turn it over to the Procurement IQ folks so that you can actually see kind of a live demo of what the system looks like, and kind of connect what I was discussing with how it is in the system.
All right, thank you for that, Austin. Let's seeing some requests to go ahead and get started with the live demonstration. So Kalia, if you'd like, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks, Chadwick. Let me go and share my screen, make sure that's all working. Can everyone see the Procurement IQ landing page pop up here? Yeah. Is that loaded for everyone yet? Dan, can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Austin, for giving us a bit of a walkthrough of an actual use case. It's always great to hear, how sometimes your colleagues are using some of the resources you have available. So I'm kind of going to probably touch on a few of the key themes that you did when I'm walking through, and kind of piggyback off your examples here as well. So just before I log in, just a couple of functional things. I know we've probably got folks who are, like yourself, Austin, familiar with Procurement IQ, or we used to be called IBIS World Procurement, for those who've been around for a while. And then I'll maybe have some folks who haven't been in a little while, or might be seeing this for the first time. So I'm going to be conscious as I go through. The way for any newer folks things work with Procurement IQ is everyone will have access through their SBO. And also Diane and myself both work for the NASPO license. So we are available to offer any support, from anything to I can't get logged in, right through to I'm working on a particular RFP and need help identifying the right report or the right information. So feel free to, always reach out to us. Traffic is always a great support as well. That's all part of the service that we've been providing for quite a number of years now. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to log in as myself today, but all of you, as I said, if you have need help to identify your own login, let Diana or I know, and we can help you out. Okay. So something I did want to touch on before I do a little bit of a walkthrough is that Procurement IQ recently, at the beginning of this year, did a rather large overhaul of all of our core category reports. So there is still 1,030 different categories, mainly in direct focus, that we provide information on. However, we have rehauled the way in which they are formatted, and with that actually added in a number of new sections. So there is actually additional content which is uniform in each and every one of the category reports. So Austin, you actually touched on a couple of those new sections, so it's great to see they're coming to fruition and being used. And I'm going to kind of show folks, especially if you haven't been in a little while, where some of those things live. Okay. So for anyone newer who wants to kind of understand how to navigate the site, the easiest way to use Procurement IQ is to just do a quick search. So there are two search bars. I wouldn't get too concerned about this being advanced. They both do pretty much the exact same thing. So you can type in kind of like a keyword. So like if we were doing, armored car services, type that in, or janitorial is another one I think was mentioned earlier. Kind of click go. The other way, if you are sort of wanting just to get an idea as to the scope of what's covered, is to click on this all reports link just here. So when you do that, it will actually pull up a full list of all the Procurement IQ category reports. So kind of scrolling through, you can see by sector, there's quite a broad scope. Sometimes a category that you may be working on might be called something a little different. It also might be that we actually have two reports you might need to use. That's something Diane and I can help support you with when you're trying to identify the right information. And also you can search by NAICS codes and a GP code, excuse me, as well in the search function up here too. Okay. All right, I'll let that just go back to the landing page. So I thought today, seeing as Austin went through it in kind of more detail, I was going to just click on janitorial here. This is a pretty popular report. Now for everyone following along, this may not be a category that you manage. However, when you actually are in the reports, because they all follow the exact same structure, as I kind of step through today, and I won't go through everything because there's a lot of info, you'll be able to apply how to use this report for this category to whatever report is relevant to yours. As I scroll through, you can kind of see janitorial services came up, as well as some other kind of closely related reports. So like detergent, for example, window cleaning services. So I'm going to click into this one and just take a quick note of this little violator score. I'll touch on what that is in a second. Okay. So when you first jump into the core category report here, you'll notice if it's been a little while, there's a few less tabs than there were previously. There is actually more information, just a little less duplication than there was in the previous format. So the first thing, which Austin also mentioned as well, just make sure that you're in the right report by having a look at what this includes as well as what it excludes. It's great to actually see that there's some links here as well. So this is a fairly straightforward one, janitorial services, that some of them might have a little bit of overlap, or you might want to just double check that there isn't a more relevant report that you would want to use instead. Again, if you get stuck, that's where Diane and myself can assist you. All of this information for anyone who's kind of relatively new to the resource is put together in-house by our own analysts. So if we need to ask them questions as well, that's something that we can do for you as well. Okay, so I'm going to track down a little bit and come back in a second as I want to highlight the recent development section. So this is one of the newer sections as well, and it is pretty pertinent just to note now where this exists, because this actually is going to drive all the updates for the reports. Previously, you might find an updated report like maybe 2 to 4 times per year. However, that just wasn't quite current enough. So in order to make things a lot more immediate so that they're actionable for you as you're using a lot of the information, the analyst will manage or track any particular events or developments that are impacting different categories throughout the life cycle of that particular event or development. They'll be listed in here, and they will also provide you with links to the sections that have been updated or that are affected by these particular developments. So when you are in the report that's relevant to you, you can actually set yourself up with this little alarm clock, with a little alert, and it will send you a quick email. But that's a great way just to see, especially if you're familiar with the category already and you only really want to know what's new or what's changed. That's a great way to kind of avoid reading through every single page. I'm going to have a look at a few key sections. As I said, not everything. For anyone who's seeing this or is newer to the resource, there is a couple of other little functionality pieces I wanted to point out. Some of you may prefer to use this offline, and you may want to download a PDF. So that's, you just click on this little PDF button here and print or save to PDF. You can also obviously set up your alerts and then search within the report as well. Okay. So just a quick note, if anyone's got questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. Dan's going to help me kind of monitor any questions, and if it's sort of relevant to answer straight away, I can address those as we go through. All right, so not to jump around too much, there is a summary sort of section at the top of each page, which I'll look at in a little bit more detail shortly, but I did want to highlight one of the newer sections that we have recently added in for every category is this SWOT analysis. So exactly as the name suggests, we're going to look here at strengths and weaknesses of this particular category within this industry, as well as what some opportunities or threats are. So you can overlay this with understanding how your vendor performs, or looking at maybe if this is a newer category, things that you might want to take note of as you start working through either your category plan, whether it's a new solicitation. This is a great new tool for you to take advantage of as well. Right, so I've just jumped over to the second tab here, which is the buyer power score. You may recall before I clicked into janitorial services, I highlighted that this actually appeared next to the name in the search results page. So the buyer power score is a score from -5 to +5. For those of you who are sort of more seasoned Procurement IQ users, you may remember it only used to be 1 or 0 to 5. This is actually allowing us to take into account more of an understanding of how the supplier's leverage sits versus the buyers, rather than just we've kind of extrapolated that out. So where we see this buy later sort of recommendation here, where that comes from is us looking at the historical buyer power score for the last couple of years, as well as our expectations for the next year as well. So for example, right now we're at a 2.2, but we can see things are looking up. So if anyone's got a janitorial services contract that comes up next year or the year after, that's great. The other way to look at this too is, if right now I do have to renew my existing contract, maybe I should do a shorter term contract so that, instead of doing a 3-year again, maybe I'll do a 1 year, and then we can then renegotiate when I'm actually going to be in a better position and have more leverage from a buying standpoint here. So this is a great way just to have a little bit more of a strategic look about how you can approach some of your upcoming contracts, the duration. And of course, with Procurement IQ, whenever you see this little arrow, you can actually download this if you wanted to use that in any internal collateral. It also will pull out the data behind this pictorial as well, this infographic, and you'll see that throughout the reports too. So how do our analysts actually put the buyer power score together? So we look at a number of different components, all of which we will discuss and provide a lot of qualitative information about. This is just a very quantitative look. So everything from switching costs right through to price trends, volatility, availability of substitutes. So you can see market share concentration. There's lots of different players in this space, more so than maybe some other categories. So that actually is in our favor, but unfortunately, there's quite a few things that tend to be more on, at this point, the supplier's power side. So you can actually hyperlink if you wanted to get more of an idea and just kind of skip over to some of these sections. I'm not going to cover off on all of them, but I'll cover off on a few key ones as well. But that just gives you some background as to what goes into the biopower score. Okay. All right, let's jump into the pricing environment. I'm going to look at a couple of the different sections in here and give you just a quick look. Okay, so as we progress through the next few tabs, you'll notice there is a key takeaway sections at the top, along with this sort of summary. So that's something that if you've only got a few minutes, or if you're familiar with the category and you're just revisiting it and you want to see what's new or what's changed, just get a quick snapshot. Maybe you've only got a couple of minutes to go in. This is a great way just to do that without having to read through it, everything. But on that note, we are going to have a look at a few key things. Okay. So Procurement IQ will provide you with what we call market pricing. So this will look at the range for services within a particular category and then give you that average market price. There's obviously going to be different factors that will determine where you would fall in this range for what you're purchasing. Sometimes, you know, you might have more specific or more a higher level of expertise required for certain tasks within, say, janitorial services in this case. So, you know, we can look at some of the different, you know, categories here within this particular service and, you know, how they determine whether in the lower or the higher range. So it just gives you an idea. Here, the analysts have sort of put this together as a reference point for you. The other thing that we are also providing now that is new is a look at geographic wage rates across the United States. So you can see across the top here, I can switch between a couple of different types of roles within this particular category. And you can see this heat map as I hover over, say it's actually done by, I think, county. So you can sort of see what the average rates are for the different levels within this particular resource roles. So that will help you kind of build out any kind of cost structure benchmarking, especially if you've got like a vendor that's passing on a large increase and citing in this case that labor rates are, you know, going through the roof, and you can actually kind of go and build that out and use this information just to validate that, or as well to go back and push back on that increase. So this is all in table format here as well, and you can kind of search via the particular city, wherever it is that you're interested in looking for. So to speak a little bit more on the geographic, or the wage rates, I should say, looking at the different occupations, we will provide you with some explanation as to what each of these roles are. Look at, you know, the different entry, median, and experience level rates, just to help you, in addition, build out more of an in-depth kind of cost structure for yourselves there too. Okay. All right, I'm going to push on and look at some of the vendor information now as well. Okay, so got our takeaways and our at a glance summary as well. So for every category, this will look familiar to some of you, although it has been built out a little bit more since we did the overhaul. We will look at the top, say, 10 to 15 suppliers, and that's by market share. So like Austin said, sometimes you might kind of Google and go and work through the ads and see who's who. This is a great way actually just to kind of cut through all that noise and see, you know, who are some of these suppliers. Now we're going to provide you an idea as to, you know, their operational size or scope. I did see something pop up earlier about, like, do we identify which vendors have operations in which, like, particular states? This is kind of the level to which we look at, you know, are they global, national, or regional? So you can see where they're headquartered. So it may not go down quite as specific, but it will give you kind of a starting point here, at least kind of knowing who's who, and give you an idea as to where they're headquartered. The other things that we provide in terms of identifying vendors and some info about them is an idea as to how large they are in terms of employees as well as market share. And then the revenue and profit levels are also provided here. One thing which I'm sure we've all had our hurdles with is the private companies versus public companies. There will obviously be a little less information available from private companies because they don't have to report. So sometimes you'll see here there might be a few NAs. I know janitorial services tends to be quite concentrated in terms of private companies. So when we look at risk level, which is this, it just comes from the Altman Z score that looks at the annual financial results, sometimes we'll be challenged with not being able to provide some companies due to the fact that they are private. But what this will allow you to look at for those public companies is, do they have a low, medium, or high risk score? And what that is actually telling us is how likely are they to be solvent in the next 2 years. So if something has a high volatility, like this guy here, we might want to actually see if we can go have a little bit more of an in-depth look at their financials, see whether or not, is that our incumbent? Does that mean it's worth maybe going to RFP and seeing if we can work with another vendor that might be more stable? These are things that you can consider as you kind of process and go through this vendor statistic table information. Okay, so let's look. Right. I'm actually going to also just touch on another new section here. So we've recently started looking at, we've always looked at a little bit of supplier diversity, but we've also recently started looking at ESG trends. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance issues. So what the analyst does, they'll obviously take care of their cluster of reports, fits within their area of expertise, and they'll look at things like waste management, water efficiencies, understanding, lobbying practices in this area, pay equality, all of the things that are becoming more and more heavily scrutinized, I suppose, in across so many categories, just the way our world is kind of at the moment. So the ESG section here will help you kind of identify where there might be opportunities for you if you do have goals or you want to set goals around different ESG trends. So it'll look at it obviously on each category level, what some of the opportunities there within, in this case, janitorial services would be if you are looking to incorporate some of those into your practice as well. All right, so I'm going to jump into the last tab here. Okay, I'm just going to skim over our summary here. Okay. So within business requirements, which is our final tab here, there is quite a significant amount of new information. So some of you have probably been using this over the last few months, but I'm going to cover off for those of you who might be seeing this for the first time. So scrolling down, let's pause on vendor qualification here. So previously, we did have a buying decision scorecard, which was kind of like a high level look at, say you could build it out based on your own requirements as well. So what we've actually done here for every category now is the analyst creates a vendor qualification table. So for each category, obviously it's going to change depending on what it is you're sourcing. There's a number of different factors that should be paid attention to a certain degree. So the analyst here will provide you with not only what they are, but also the level of importance and why in their reasoning behind that. So it just helps you obviously understand how you might want to qualify vendors, as well as also how you might want to measure some of these particular factors in order to do so. Okay, so the next two sections are we've been producing for a very long time. So some of you will be familiar with this. I know, Austin, you touched on the RFP section and the negotiation section. So I just wanted to show folks where they live now. Fairly straightforward. If you've decided that you're going to, go to bid, if you want to start creating an RFP, I know that there's probably existing templates, old RFPs that get recycled. This is a great way, if you are kind of repurposing one, just use this as a checklist to make sure you've got, the different elements that should be included in the RFP for this particular category, as well as what some things can go into each of these different sections are, just really to provide you an opportunity either to check that off, or maybe you are creating it from scratch, in which case this is just as useful, if not more, in order to ensure that you're providing as much of the right information to potential vendors, as well as, asking what you need in order to make, the best decisions. So just in a creative, robust RFP, this is a great tool. And a lot of you probably do this already, but with the negotiation questions, this section here is often, if you do decide to go to RFP, used alongside the RFP questions above. But the idea here is that, the analyst looks at, about up to 10 different issues that are impacting, in this case, janitorial services, and looks at what they are, so that, maybe there's one you haven't thought of. What are some of the questions that I can pose to potential vendors in order to help secure either a better pricing point or, a better service offering, things you might want to consider to help reduce any kind of risks there might be by entering into a particular partnership with a client, with a vendor. And when I say this is often used closely with the RFP section, if you do decide to go to RFP, what I mean by this is, if you are, you can also kind of copy and paste some of those into the actual RFP. So it kind of can work in both instances. Obviously, if you're doing a renewal and you're just negotiating with your existing vendor, it's fairly straightforward. But yeah, feel free to kind of copy and paste, manipulate some of these to speak more your language, and you can use them in your RFP as well. Okay. So the final couple of things I want to look at, we'll have plenty of time for questions or comments after as well, is under the vendor management portion here in business requirements. You've also now got key contract clauses. So, the analyst has looked at some of the contracts within this particular category and, given some recommendations on things to double check you have clauses for, just to ensure that you're protected. Obviously, sometimes you'll be repurposing old contracts or you'll have copies, but it's just like, I guess, another checkpoint for you as well. And then with that, also now included in every category report are KPIs and also SLAs, so service level agreements. So those are two sections there that we've recently added in that you can kind of use to your advantage if you're building out any kind of SLAs within a contract, or if you want to kind of look at what KPIs you might want to measure. And they're actually given some different levels of importance here by the analyst as well. Okay. So I'm going to scroll up. So I didn't go through everything. I think I touched on a few of the things that Austin gave us examples for. So thank you again, Austin, for running us through. The one thing I will point out as I jump back in, just for some of you who may be newer to the resource, if I jump into any other report, be it a product or a service, you can see here, again, once you know how to navigate through one, you'll know how to navigate through them all. We're in the process of transitioning the final ones over into this new format now. So you'll see the additional content across a lot of them as well. So I'm going to jump back out here. Diane, is there anything you think I forgot or you might think we should go through before we look at the questions?
No, nothing on my end. I think you touched on everything. I did answer a couple of questions on just the chat. It was relating to mostly the risk, the vendor risk and Altman Z-score. If you wanted to elaborate any further on that, or if there were any additional questions from anyone.
Sure. Yeah, if anyone wants to add anything else to the chat, feel free in terms of questions. I think the only other thing maybe that I do want to point out, which is kind of independent of looking at those individual category reports, is that there is also this link up here called the Procurement Insider. So this is how you would access it once you're logged in. You can also access it from the main landing page before you log in by going up to this resources section here and clicking on Resources Center. So there's a lot of articles that our analysts put together covering like tips and tricks, things about inflation. We've also done quite a few webinars and things, and these are all things that are available to the public. So I think we have one coming up in June as well. So anything that, might speak to some of the conditions and their impacts on, different categories, different economic environments. These are kind of where those will live as well. So this tends to get quite a fair bit of traffic as well. And some of those webinars we've done most recently, we'll have recordings of those here. So this one was a pretty big one. I know it's got quite a lot of interest. Some of you probably attended, but that's on there as well. That's something which I know we're all facing challenges with right now. So once again, that was up in this resources section here. Just clicking on Resource Center, or if you're logged in, you can actually click on Procurement Insider as we like to call it. So I think that I'm just having a look at the chat now. I think that in terms of what we wanted to cover off with the side, and obviously, thank you again, Wilson, for your example. We've probably done so far today. So Chadwick, we can probably pass back to you. Obviously, Diana and I will hang on just to make sure there's no additional questions in the chat, or if anyone wants to jump in, but we can probably pass back to you. We've got a little bit of time to give you.
So how do you come up with the categories? Say if a state had some unique request or unique interest in maybe in some emerging technology, or just something that doesn't seem to quite fit in one of the established categories perfectly, how could they go about maybe finding the information, or at what point does Procurement IQ really create new commodities and service categories?
Hi, I can jump in for that one, Chadwick. That's a really good question. Obviously, with our current database, we do cover over 1,000 different categories. These are going to be kind of the most common products and service categories that most of our clients are typically looking for. When it comes to something that might fall outside the scope of that, there's kind of one of two paths that we'll take. So firstly, any and all feedback that we get from our clients like yourselves is always really helpful. So we encourage you to reach out to Kalia and myself if you are having trouble finding something you need. And if it's a category that we don't currently cover, we will kind of feed that back to our production team. And what they do is they essentially have like a queue of these suggestions. If there are lots of our clients kind of asking for the same thing, if there's a category that's emerging, then that will help us prioritize what is the next report we will write and add to the collection. In fact, we've had several reports that I think were added kind of through that process. The other option is if it is something that is maybe a little bit more niche to your industry, or a little bit more specific to you guys, we do provide some more customized research services on our end as well. So that is definitely, it is an add-on service, but that's something that, we can kind of explore with you all. And then I guess the third part of it is that, we do have a lot of information in our professional archives as well. So if there's custom research that we've done for other clients that are not necessarily proprietary to their data, we can always look through those to see if there's something that would be able to help you out with your current request. And if we have anything on hand, we're always more than happy to share that with you. So I guess short answer is reach out to Kelly and myself, and we will kind of try and point you in one direction and get you as much information as we can.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to open up the floor if anyone, just for a minute or two here, if anyone has anything on their mind, anything they want to ask while our presenters are all here. I'll give everyone the opportunity. In the meantime, I am happy to see the addition of the ESG considerations. I find that fascinating, and if you could speak a little bit to kind of where you pull that information from, I'd be rather interested in that.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is one of the new sections of our report that we've recently added in as a part of the Procurement Now enhancements, as I'm sure you guys have seen. I know that we have asked internally about the ESG section and kind of the sources behind it. They do use a variety of different sources, as with most of the report, but I believe some of them include, vendors' annual and sustainability supports, websites that are maintained by Congress, the EPA, and lobbying organizations, in addition to industry publications. So it obviously, varies a little bit depending on the report itself, but there's a lot of really great content that's available, and we've consolidated that into what you now see as that new ESG section of the report, because it is a topic that has become more and more important to a lot of our sourcing clients.
Well, thank you.
Just in terms of not just specific to ESG, but if anyone does have questions about, where a lot of the information comes from or specific sources, that's something that obviously we have our main resources that we use to put things together. But if you have a specific request as to a data point within a report, that's something we can ask the analysts to provide, a reference point for you as well. So if there's any questions like that for any areas of the report, again, common theme here, reach out to Diane or I, and we can go and source that out for you and provide you that detail.
Excellent. Well, not seeing any new questions. This recording will be linked in a follow-up email with presentation slides. Those emails will go out within 1 to 2 business days following this presentation. So with that, I'm going to conclude today's presentation. I want to thank our presenters, Austin Bachman, Kalia Canley, and Diane Yu, for all this valuable information they've shared and for working with us here at NASPO to bring this to you. Thank you all for attending. As I said, you'll receive a follow-up email with slides and materials. Remember, this webinar qualifies as 1 UPP-CC contact hour. To receive your certificate, simply fill out the survey in your browser window once you've exited the webinar. It has been recorded. It'll be available for viewing on the NASPO YouTube page in the coming days, and also through the ProcurementIQ learning platform. Questions entered into the chat and Q&A boxes have been saved, and if any were not addressed, we will try and follow up via email. Thanks again to all our wonderful presenters and to you, our guests. Everyone stay safe and have a great day.
Thanks, Chadwick. You too.